everyone. Welcome to Project Herpetoculture podcast. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, and I'm joined as always by my intrepid co-host, Philip Leitz of Arids Only. We have an excellent show for you today, but before diving in, we have some brief housekeeping. So first, I'd like to thank Dylan and the Animals at Home Network for hosting our show. It continues to be a pleasure to be part of this platform. We'd also like to extend special gratitude to Charlie, who generously edits our audio and has done a lot to improve the quality of our show over time. And we'd also like to take a moment to tell you about our sponsors. So first, we have Custom Reptile Habitats, who have been with us since day one. They produce top-of-the-line PVC reptile enclosures, and I use them for a lot of the large format vivaria here. They're also carrying universal rocks, misking products, and a bunch of other useful stuff. So if you're in the market for any of that and you're planning to make a purchase, consider doing so through the link in our bio or description. We'll receive a small commission at no additional cost to you, and that really helps us keep the lights on over here.
Up next, we have Fairy Tale Dragons. That's the joint venture between Heather Moy and Ron St. Pierre, both of whom have achieved legendary status in herpetoculture. They've accomplished quite a lot and produced some of the finest bearded dragons and taliqua in the country, alongside a whole host of other species such as emerald tree boas and green tree pythons. Check them out if you're in the market for any of that, and be sure to follow along with them on social media. They're always up to something interesting over there.
Next, we have Cold-Blooded Caffeine, roasters of delicious coffees from all over the globe. We have a private label with them, the PH Blend, which is a light roast coffee from Rwanda. It's a great choice for those who prefer a more floral coffee with notes of berry, but they have a wide variety of options for a broad array of preferences. So check them out. And if you place an order, don't forget to use the code PROJECTHERP for 10% off.
We're also very pleased to have the support of Exoterra, a brand that needs no introduction. It's safe to say that herpetoculture wouldn't be where it is today without the influence of Exoterra. For decades, they've been industry leaders in innovation, offering just about everything needed for reptile care, from diets and supplements to enclosures, substrates, and lighting. We're both big fans of their naturalistic terraria and substrates in particular. They have a lot of interesting products in the works as we speak, and we're really looking forward to seeing what comes next.
And next we have Tamura Designs. For those in the know, Tamura Designs is widely regarded as one of the finest enclosure manufacturers on the planet. They produce outstanding large format vivaria with endless options for customization, drains, UV printed backgrounds, lighting rigs. On top of all of that, they also make amazing deli cup displays for expos and these incredible multi-unit condos, which I use here. So if you're interested in any of that and you decide to make a purchase, use the code Herpetoculture for 15% off one item as a special offer to our listeners only. We also have Happy Dragons. We're really thankful to have the support of Happy Dragons. They are producing some amazing content for bettering our reptile care. And we've been actually partnering with them to produce even more content like webinars. Also, the platform and subscription service offers breeder access to first clutches, things like that. We have online courses coming down the pipeline. In addition, we have live Q&As with reptile experts, such as Mariah Healy from Reptiphiles. It's truly an outstanding subscription package that also offers discounts on their supply partners, such as Ovopost and Joss's Frogs. It's really an outstanding product. So check it out. And let us know what you think.
And last but not least, if you're interested in supporting the show directly with something of a tip or a monthly donation, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/projectherpetoculture. We have a monthly live chat there with all of our paid subscribers. That's been a whole lot of fun so far. We also have a whole line of merchandise like t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and more on our website. And of course, sharing the show with a friend, subscribing on YouTube, and keeping up with social media is always very helpful.
And with all that said, we're on to the show. Thanks, everybody. All right. Project Herpetoculture Podcast. This is episode 77 with Dean Missimer. Dean, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks. 1 second. I'm pouring water.
No worries.
Yeah. I should have done this beforehand.
And 77.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we made it
amateur
77.
All right. I'm back.
How are you, man?
Good. Thanks. How are you guys?
Pretty good.
Very good.
Yeah, stoked to talk to you.
Same.
So I guess to begin, I'm curious just to hear a little bit about your background. Kind of how did you get started in your interest in herpetoculture and also in entomology, if you would be willing to share a little bit about that.
Sure. So similar to many others, it's difficult to point where exactly it started. But one of my first memories, or maybe even my actual first memory, I don't really know, but it was receiving some Asian bell crickets as a gift when I was a 3-year-old in Japan. So we called them Suzumushi. And I think they used to be a common pet. I don't know about these days. Like everyone just plays video games every day. It's different.
Yeah.
But so um, basically every year I would spend my summers in Japan, and my relatives are in a rural area called Fukuiken, and there are just bugs and lizards and stuff everywhere. So I always look forward to that. And also in my younger years, my parents always took us to this resort. It's called Morinoye. It's kind of like it translates to House of the Forest. It's like this nature resort thing. And then we would go camping, and they had these maps of where you could find, each little type of bug and lizard and stuff like that. Because I guess Japan just kind of has much more of a bug culture than we do here. Over here, it's kind of seen as gross by most people. It's a little more normal over there, and they really like their beetles and stuff. But anyway, so that was sort of the beginning. When I turned 10, I got my first official pet reptile, which was a veiled chameleon. And so this is obviously besides all the alligators, lizards, and stuff I'm catching all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think this happened because my parents really didn't want me playing video games. So they tried to foster like any other interest I had. And then I guess it went out of control from there. I started catching frogs and gopher snakes from my grandparents' place in Napa because they had a bunch of land there. And eventually I got some savanna monitors. Then that led me to kind of like lurking around the septic zone forums, as I like to call it. And that was my first run-in with any sort of reptile community. And although it all sort of came to an end when I had to move into the dorms for undergrad. And I heard I'm not alone in this. A lot of people, during the late teens or whenever they started college, they sort of moved away for a little. And that was the thing for me, partially because I had to move. But anyway, after a long hiatus around, so at this point, I finished my undergrad. I'm back home around 2015 or 2016. My wife, who at the time was my girlfriend, got a bearded dragon. And of course, I had to get a couple lizards as well.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Naturally.
Yeah, only fair.
Yeah, we all know. And but she was kind of disgusted by like the roaches and the crickets and stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll look for something else. And I already had a general interest in nutrition. Like formally, I've only taken like one nutrition course, but otherwise, I just had like a personal interest in it. Mm-hmm. But I just thought like, yeah, our lizards, they sleep at night. So I don't know why we're giving them nocturnal insects anyway. So I went looking for other options. And then I saw that you could get locusts from Europe, but not here, which seemed kind of lame at the time. So yeah, but
still
anyway,
lame.
I just went outside to catch some and breed them. So I've been using captive bred grasshoppers as a feeder since then. But I wasn't connected to any sort of reptile community at the time. So wait a second.
Sure.
Gotta stay hydrated. All right. Then so a couple years later, I think it was around 2018 or 2019, at the Sacramento Reptile Show. I ran into a dude named Kai Fan, who I recognize. I initially recognized him because we worked at the same pet store as teenagers, albeit at different times because he's a few years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we were chatting and he heard about my grasshoppers and he was like, can I buy them off you? And at the time I thought it was weird because I never planned to sell them. It was just for our pets.
Mm-hmm.
But he started buying them regularly and then he asked me to breed more and more because now he's in the Facebook groups and like he's selling them off to people in the community and he was struggling to breed them for himself. So the problem was I was about to enter my post-bac and in graduate school for speech language pathology, both of which involved internships at the same time. So I was about to be working insane hours for the next 4 to 5 years, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I decided to do was I'll teach this guy how to breed grasshoppers and whatever free time I had. And that way the reptile community would have access to them as a feeder. And all I asked in return was some help with acquisition of new species from the wild that I didn't have time to like catch on my own during that period. And I still had this interest in breeding new feeders. So I continue to work on new species and hopefully discover potential, nutritional or whatever implications they had. So anyway, I entered graduate school. And I guess grasshopper farming is not intuitive for everyone because this dude is calling me all the time. And I just returned the calls whenever I could on my lunch breaks or late nights, which those were the only moments I really had time. And then, fast forward a couple of years and to last year, and, now he has the hang of breeding a couple of species. And I've personally developed breeding protocols for a little over 20 species at this point. Wow. And so I graduated with my master's. I finally have time to work on my own business. And now it's called feedmychameleon.com. And it focuses on appropriate feeders and nutrition for arboreal and diurnal reptiles. So that's where I am right now.
That's awesome.
Amazing, man. Very cool.
Yeah. I wanted to, this is really, really fascinating stuff because, so how did you, when you first started pulling some of, you said you kind of had this realization where you were like, oh, why are we feeding nocturnal feeders to a diurnal lizard? Like, that seems like kind of it's almost like an obvious blind spot because there's certainly something I never considered. I can say that for sure. From that point to catching some of your own and figuring out how to breed them, how did you figure out how to breed them? Was it just mostly through sort of diligent research into their natural history and then trying to replicate that? Like, I'm really curious to know how that process went for you and sort of what challenges and the various things you encountered along the way.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on iNaturalist, and I spent a lot of time on Google Scholar. So grasshoppers, because of their agricultural pest status, actually have a decent amount of studies on their life cycle. So through a lot of reading and experimentation, I was able to figure all that out. And I still do all that. I still spend about an hour a day in some combination of iNat or reading studies off Google Scholar to this day.
Yeah. Man, I'm looking at your website right now. This is great. This is incredible stuff. I had no idea you did this. This is great. You even have a flake diet for them and a breeding diet. This is amazing. You put all this. This is wild.
Yeah, little by the diets, just little by little, tweak them over the years, and I have a pretty good one down, like a general purpose one, and I also have here I have specific ones for each species. The thing is, I don't have all the species available for sale or anything at the moment, so that's not on the website yet. But
Sure.
I just moved and I'm setting everything up right now. If you can see the racks behind me, they're empty, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to take some time, but eventually they'll all be on the website. I'm working with 6 species right now. I'm trying to decide how many I want to keep in the end. Of course, there's also katydids and beetles and some other stuff too. But eventually that'll all be ready. And also, if you look at the website, a lot of stuff is just sold out because as soon as I list them, they just get sold. So
Yeah.
I definitely need to work on increasing that stock. It's just going to take some time.
Sure. And a giant Asian mantis adult breeding pair. That's pretty
Nice.
Yeah, so that was I don't know. I just had them as pets for fun. I realized that I could just when the ooths hatch,
Yeah.
I could just dump all the mantis babies into the grasshopper bins, and then they would just grow up there alongside. Sort of like a very twisted cohabitation.
That's great.
And so there's kind of like freebies. They're there. I like having them around, but they're not like something I'm doing on purpose, I guess, if that makes any sense.
No, sure. It's just for fun. Right. So, okay. So maybe let's get in. This might be a great time to sort of discuss the why. So like, why make this a business? Why make this something that, or basically, how can I articulate? I want to articulate this question in a better way. Can you give like sort of the sort of the best case, here's why I want to do this and why I think this is an important thing to offer our captive reptiles and amphibians.
Sure. Yeah.
It might seem obvious, right? Like, I mean, in some ways,
there
might be aspects of it that seem intuitive,
Yeah. So let's, I guess a good place to start would be, if we take a look at, what are typical insects? Actually, I'll start by talking about chameleons because, this is sort of, my area of interest right now, but so if you look at what people consider staple foods for chameleons on these charts and stuff you'll see on social media, you'll see crickets, mealworms, dubia roaches, etc. Literally none of these things are eaten by chameleons in the wild, right? Not at all, not even a little bit. If you look at any of the chameleon diet studies, they actually only eat insects within 6 orders, if that makes any sense. So basically like 6 types of insects. And these orders are Orthoptera, which is grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. But of course, crickets are nocturnal, so they never really interact with chameleons in any way. And then the next order is Diptera, which is flies, Hymenoptera, which is bees and other stinging insects, Lepidoptera, so that's butterflies, moths, and their caterpillars. Usually they're going to be in the caterpillar form. Coleoptera, beetles, and I'm missing one. Hemiptera.
Hemiptera, yeah.
Yeah.
Cicadas, stink bugs, all those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So any study you look at for chameleon diets, 90 to 99% of the diet is going to find the only in these 6 orders of insects, right? Anything else is an outlier. Like, so the question is, why are we feeding, something that's not even close to what they're eating in the wild? And obviously, it has to do with the ease of breeding and whatnot. But the idea that these are staples, I thought could be a little misguided. And I started with a really basic nutritional analysis, very surface level. I'm not looking into any micronutrients or anything like that. We're starting just with the macros. And if you just looking at macros, you look at start with the feeders that are currently used in the insect trade. So dubia roaches, superworms, both of the insects, you're looking at about 50-50 protein to fat ratio. I think it's something like like 40, maybe 45% protein, 45% fat, and 10% is going to be like fiber and acids, like that. Now, compared to the insects they're eating in the wild, and you can find all this information because there are entomophagy diet studies on all these insects, which is just the studies where they're used for human consumption. Right. And grasshoppers are at like 75% protein, 10% fat, right? Completely different. Okay, let's look at another one. Let's look at flies. We're looking at, I think the number was 68% protein. And I don't remember what that percentage was, but it was, I think it was in the teens. And same thing with beetles. So, and I believe silkworms as well. So, I mean, the first thing I noticed was that there's just this massive difference in really basic aspects of nutrition between what they eat in the wild and what we are considering as staples in the hobby today. So that was a huge motivator for me.
Amazing. Very cool.
Brilliant stuff. I mean, this is interesting. So as we record this, we are preparing or nearly done in preparation for a webinar that we're doing, I think tomorrow, on the history of herpetoculture. And some of this is kind of at the forefront of my mind because I was kind of looking at some of the, in writing out and gathering some of this information, I was basically sort of looking at like, well, what were some of the contributing factors to the explosion of herpetoculture popularity that kind of happened in both the US and Europe, primarily in the 60s and 70s, and then going on to the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, right, as we know it today. And it was a mix of, it was a really big kind of crescendo of forces, if you will, right? It was mass development, sort of exposure to National Geographic, zoo books, all these publications and television shows that showed people other things around the world, showed things to a culture of people that were already keeping different animals as pets in the first place, right? Some of it was the shift where, some of the first major, like Tetra and Zoomed and Exoterra all released some of the first reptile-specific products. Zoomed releasing the first UVB lamp for reptiles in like the 84 or something, 84, 83. But it was also a little bit about sort of how there was enough people figuring out that you could maintain these things on insects that were already being produced in some way, shape, or form. It looked like a lot for fishing, right? So crickets, waxworms, mealworms, night crawlers, all this stuff was for fishing, and then some, and then for other related things, whether it be birds or whatever. People just kind of shifted, other fish keeping, whatnot. The whole thing, and something that struck me was that I've heard people say. I've heard people like various economists and philosophers and people in various circles will ask questions like, if you look forward 50 to 100 years, what are some of the things that you think we do today that people will look back on as kind of like, ugh, like it's weird that you did that, right? And one of those things is like orthodontics, right? The way we think, like slapping metal and spreading out people's jaws with like weird mechanisms is something that we think probably like 50, 100 years will be done in a very different way. Another example of this might be, using like, I know actually it's still done, but using like leeches to help deal with certain medical concerns, even though that's still done to a certain degree. Even the use of maggots is actually still done to a certain degree, which is a total mind blower. But like what I'm trying to get at here in a long-winded way is to say that I'm wondering if in like a 50 to 100 years, we're going to look back on the kind of foods that we were giving some of our reptiles and think like, wow, maybe we were like way off. Like maybe we had the wrong idea giving them, like, cause you pointed it out, you saying, why are we giving nocturnal food items to a diurnal lizard? That literally never crossed my mind in the slightest. Like I never, and I mean, That shouldn't surprise anybody. I'm pretty dense, but like, yeah, but that's a brilliant. I think that's a brilliant. It's a brilliant problem that I think a lot of people might not have recognized as a problem, right? I mean, I know I take a lot of my feeders for granted. Even when I get the exciting opportunity to go catch feeders from outside, I get excited about it, but I don't think, boy, sure would love to have these constantly, you know. But it would be really nice to have them constantly. So like, this is an interesting thing for you to take on as a task. So other than deciding like, okay, maybe I'm going to breed this for my own pets, when did you start realizing that this might be something you could scale and develop into a business that would actually be, you know, really useful for herpetoculture? Like, was there a point, was there a moment when that was like, oh, I could definitely do this and scale this up?
Yeah, I mean, I always figured I could scale it if I had the time. That was the big killer for me, right? Just in graduate school, they kill us out there.
Yeah, they really do.
You know, I figured once that was over, it shouldn't be an issue. But yeah, as far as scale goes, that was the only hurdle for me. But going back to, I think you made a really good point of you know, if, you know, when we look back, like what will we think? Like, okay, why are we feeding them nocturnal stuff? You know, it almost, you know, once you've thought about it for long enough, you know, it seems kind of obvious, right? And not just nocturnal, but dubias and superworms. These are burrowing insects. They live in the ground and the leaf litter and stuff. It's just it almost seems silly, but and it's not just, you know, if the nutrition ended up being the same, then I guess, you know, there wouldn't be much there to it. But it actually ends up being a big difference. And you know, the difference is almost akin to, and I feel like I might have heard you, Philip, mention this before, but it's almost like the difference between, you know, let's say for human consumption, the difference between eating wild game meat or versus the fatty cows and pig that we factory farm, right?
Totally.
Like,
yeah.
It is a massive difference in and what they end up eating. So there's just and that's just scratching the surface, right? We're not even talking about micronutrients or anything else like that yet. So
we're also not even discussing. Sorry, my apologies. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the other thing is, like, you have such a diversity of things that you're working to propagate. It's also, there's probably psychological benefits too, right? I mean, like being able to feed something, everything from, you know, again, I'm not going to complain, you know, I'll feed a waxworm now and again, right? Like, obviously, like I have to, but it's like feeding something a waxworm is going to be so different than feeding them like a big fat ass juicy katydid, right? Like it's going to be a totally
so different,
such a different experience for the animal.
Yeah.
And the number of times my animals have had drastically, markedly distinct reactions to various food items as compared to the usual, you know, I mean, that alone, if you haven't, you know, anybody listening to this, if you haven't seen those differences, you have absolutely got to try it out. You have to see the way that, like, especially a predatory reptile, you know, not even a predatory reptile. When I feed my Uromastyx to dandelion, it's totally different than when you feed them a piece of lettuce from the store. Like, they go absolutely bonkers for it. And it's the same thing with, you know, when I feed a collared lizard, a giant grasshopper that I caught outside, their reaction to that is so different. It's just so vastly different. And again, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Yeah. That's a good point, because I mean, it's well known in the community that not all chameleons are going to eat dubia roaches. Actually, most of them might turn their nose at it. It's just not, you know, it's just not an evolutionarily ingrained shape of something that they're supposed to eat, right? They see it and they're like, you know, what the heck is that? Or whatever, you know, I don't know what goes in their head, but many chameleons will turn their nose at dubia roaches. Right? At least, you know, at least a superworm, like it'll resemble a caterpillar or something like that. So you could understand why it would go after that. But yeah, that's a totally good point. And same thing with the dandelions. I actually grow a bunch of, now that I moved, I have all the space to grow dandelions out there. Which that's a really good point, and it segues into something that's really important about nutrition and actually feeding your feeders. In my case, but I mean, in your case, it might be feeding your Euros. So there's this sort of a misconception. There's a misconception that we should feed our feeders the most nutrients dense, grocery store vegetables. But you got to remember these vegetables are, they're nutrient dense for human consumption, right? Mm-hmm. It's very different. And that's why I really liked your guys' wild foods webinar. I think it's very different from feeding the nutrient compositions of things that are in the wild. And if I can give an example,
please.
I was talking to you earlier about the differential grasshopper, Melanopus differentialis. So one of the things that I really like about working with grasshoppers is because of the fast generation cycle. You can learn a lot about them in a short amount of time, where you can test a bunch of stuff on them that you wouldn't be able to do with your mastics. Like, besides ethical concerns, it would take too long. And it's hard to determine, what effects your foods are having on them, because there are so many other extraneous factors you just can't control for everything. But with grasshoppers, it's very easy. And here's what I learned is that, so Melanopus differentialis, let's take a really nutrient dense vegetable, can't speak today, from the grocery store, kale, for example. So you feed kale to the differential grasshoppers. Can you guys take a guess at what happened?
You got the wrong guy, man. Yeah, I don't know enough.
They all died.
I was just gonna say they all died. Yeah.
Yes. Within 3 weeks, they all died.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, presumably, what happened here is that it's some sort of hypervitaminosis, because you overloaded them with vitamins instead of, let's say you have an animal that relies on extracting nutrients through some sort of natural gut fermentation or something like that.
Yeah.
And you're just loading them with blueberries, carrots, kale, whatever. They're just going to get nuked by vitamins. So that can go either way. It's not really about giving them as much nutrition as possible, because it can lead to overnutrition. It's giving them the right amounts. And you mentioned dandelion. As far as grasshoppers go, each species is going to have eat a different type of leafy green. I have some that hosts on grasses. I have some that hosts on weedy shrubs. I have some that hosts on trees. Like one of the ones I have prefers citrus over anything. But the reality is that you have to give them the correct type and amount of nutrition, and not just as much as possible. Do you guys know that story about so there was this the first European explorers going to the Arctic, they had heard a superstition about you can't eat polar bear liver, right?
Right.
And they just and they obviously completely ignored it. They're like, oh, these primitive losers, they're stupid stories. And they ate the polar bear liver, and they did not survive. Let's just say that.
It was vitamin A, right? Because it was so high in vitamin A.
Yeah,
right.
Hypervitaminosis A, and then their skin fell off.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and not just that, I think it develops polyps in your brain and stuff like that. I don't know, but anyway, polar bear is that to the extreme, so they just straight up died.
Wow,
nice. That's awesome. I read that recently. I don't remember where, but I heard that.
Was that Arctic Dreams?
It might have. I think it was Arctic Dreams. It had to be. Yeah, it had to be. It's the only thing I've been reading recently that had anything to do with the Arctic. But that's brilliant stuff. I mean, there were so many things you said in there. I wrote a couple of notes down in the chat just for myself to remember. The fact that you mentioned the evolutionary, like some chameleons will turn up their noses to dubia, right? And it's like just because they're not evolved to recognize that as a food source necessarily, right? And this got me thinking about something that was involved in my art education, which was something we called shape language, right? So half the time this was devoted to developing a composition, like seeing, if you have a picture plane, within that picture plane, the composition is your shape language, right? It conveys some kind of information, and whether that's tension or joy, whatever it is, right? You can convey a lot through just shape and how you put it together. But it also came through when we were designing for video games. And when you design for video games, it's pretty well known that if you're designing characters or creatures or vehicles or whatever, for the most part, every single thing you design has to be recognizable by its silhouette on an almost instantaneous level. And by recognizable, that means you have to recognize right away whether it's friend or foe, whether it's something you can or cannot use, pick up, all this stuff, right? And it's weird because in some ways that's just that's purely a simulacra of reality, right? Like it's something you do out in the real world to a certain degree already. And there's no doubt in my mind at all that all of our reptiles and amphibians have this very well developed. There's a reason that when I walk by I was actually noticing it this morning, my Tenacera conspicuosa, his name's Gregor Mendel. After yeah, you guys, you get it, nerds get it. Yeah, it's just, he's awesome.
I pay attention in class.
Right. Yeah. Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. And so anyway,
this man has a master's.
Right. Yeah. So when I walk by his pen now, he's developed such a recognition of me and my routine that he knows I've got food and he follows me when I walk down the aisle. But if they're learning your routine, they definitely know shape language too. They're recognizing various things, because again, I hate to go back to the collared lizard, but when I would put a banded gecko, Coleonyx variegatus, in the cage with a collared lizard, it wasn't even, it was instant recognition. They knew from the second they caught sight of it, of movement at all. They were like, oh shit, food. And they would hit it. They knew exactly what it was. And it probably wasn't as simple as, oh shit, food. It was probably like, banded gecko, I'm going to, they knew right away. Like they knew beyond any shadow of a doubt exactly what they were going after. Right. And so it is such, I don't know. I'm just very psyched on this topic. And I'm really, I think this is a really phenomenal thing you're doing. This is really cool. And I think, I want to give some space for Roy here, because I know he has some stuff to say too. I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah. You never have to apologize about collared lizards. They're really cool. They're so cool. Dude. I would. Oh my god! The thing that scared me about them is they're so fast. I'm like, oh my god, what if it gets away and I can't catch it?
Yeah. That'll happen.
Rip.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you. I used to literally keep a noose on a collapsible fly rod in my facility for when that would happen. Because wild caught ones, when you're acclimating them to captivity, would sometimes bolt. They would figure out how to bolt out of the cage, and you'd have to catch them later. And they're really brilliant, and you can't approach this. That's how you have to catch them in the first place. And you have to approach them with a noose to catch them. Now the captive bred ones, I mean, they don't sweat it at all, and eventually they would get pretty mellow. But yeah, they're amazing. But yes, they will. They're astonishing jumpers, as they say.
Yeah. So sorry, I cut off Roy.
Oh no, it's fine. I'm all for this. I mean, I guess it's kind of redundant, but I think that this is such an interesting topic and so important, and something that's really just so overlooked. There's such a large part of herpetoculture seems to be trying to figure out how to get animals to eat things that we want them to eat. Like there are dozens and dozens of species that have, my suspicion is that the reason why they've never acclimated to captivity well is because, they've been fed a diet that is utterly inappropriate for how they've evolved over millennia, and there are a number of snakes, for example, that only eat frogs, only eat lizards, it's like,
Right.
I'm going to feed this thing mice until it gets fatty liver and dies, over and over and over again. And I feel like it makes a lot of sense that the same could be true for our lizards in a lot of ways. And I definitely agree around the whole like shape language aspect and the psychological benefit, if nothing else, to feeding things a more appropriate diet. And I've witnessed that firsthand with my polychorus. I've shared about this over and over again, but the first time I offered them phasmids and mantids, the kind of reaction I saw from them was unlike anything else. These are pretty picky feeders, notoriously picky feeders in the case of wild-caught polychorus. And I've never had a polychorus, wild-caught or captive bred, refuse a mantid or a phasmid when it was offered, and also it's really interesting to watch them because the way they approach even those two different, orders of insects is totally different. And like they're very calculated when they go after a mantid so as not to get on the receiving end of those raptorial forelegs. And so they'll actually pounce and they'll grasp the legs in their jaws so the mantid's fully immobilized. And it's like, okay, you see something like that and you're like, okay, these little things have a little bit more going on upstairs than we realize,
Yeah.
that it's like, it's able to recognize, okay, this is food, but it's also potentially threatening if I'm not cautious about how I approach it.
Yeah.
And so cool to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's just that naturally ingrained response, right? It triggers that sort of like automatic reaction that you basically don't see any other time in reptiles, right? And I kind of mean that as opposed to like humans, you can sort of like train an automatic response, right? If you drill something over and over, and obviously Philip would know because he would say something about jujitsu. Oh yeah, I trained that a bajillion times. It's automatic. I'm not thinking I'm going to go triangle into armbar into omoplata. Right. It just goes, right. It's automatic. So with reptiles, it's really just like an evolutionarily ingrained response, I guess. And so it's for those who haven't seen it, you got to try it. you got to see it for yourself.
I mean,
for sure.
It's something. It's weird. It almost seems like I could be totally. This is probably not right at all. But in some ways, it almost seems like the herbivore keeping community is seems like kind of like a little more in tune with this in some way. Like just as an example, you have that there seems like a lot of innovation around herbivore diet. Right. I think of an example like the Arcadia optimized 52, right. Which is like it's a great food. It's like, I've been using it since they released it. It's these little bricks of, whole mess of different plants, and it's mostly grass, different types of grasses. And, my Euros and my tortoises will eat it, and especially when it's mixed in with other foods, they'll eat it. They don't necessarily go nuts as a specific type of food, but I'll tell you, as a topper, and then my chuckwallas in particular, like I just posted a video today of my chuckwallas because they'll eat that stuff like it's actual mainstay of their diet. Like this is something they want to eat, and they eat it dry, they eat it soaked, they eat the whole thing. And ever since I've started giving it to them, their poop resembles almost like frame for frame what I see in the wild. Like when you go out in California, I mean, you're in California, you've herped for chuckwallas, I'm sure. And when you're out there and you find, you're going to find chuckwalla poop before you find the chucks most of the time, if you don't see the chuckwalla. And they're all these little pellets of like mostly grass and plant matter, like fibrous plant matter. And right, my chuckwalla's poop looks like that. Like that's what it looks like. It's this fibrous plant matter. And I'll tell you, I've been keeping chuckwallas for a long time, and it wasn't until adding that in as a major part of the diet that I started seeing their poop look that way. Before, it was a mess. Like it was a mess. Even when they don't have, like, there's no parasitic overload, it's nothing like that. It's just that what they're eating is not really what they're supposed to be getting. And same thing with the Euromastics. When I use it as a topper, their food looks like more what I would, their poop rather, looks more like what I would expect it to look like because of their ecological allegory being the chuckwalla. You know, it looks like a dried pellet with fibrous stuff. And this, you know, when I get the option, like when it's in the warm weather here and I get to go to a field near my place and just pick a million dandelions and I just scatter dandelions all over the enclosure and they eat nothing but dandelions for weeks. I mean, the animals, they never look better or happier in most ways than when they get that opportunity. And I think all the time about this. I think about the ways that I hate the sort of limiting options that going to the produce section will present to you, right? And this is just the exact same thing, but for, the grasshopper is like the equivalent of like feeding wild dandelions. Like this is what they're supposed to eat. This is the whole thing. This is so much more like what they evolved to take in. Why wouldn't they be happier? Why wouldn't they be healthier? Why wouldn't this be more beneficial? So I have a few things, a few questions, a few topics I want to get in on this because I'd really like to kind of try to unpack this in a way. If you could go through like other than, we've talked a little bit about what might be some of the health perks and the sort of psychological perks of doing this. What are some negatives, if any? Like, are there aspects of feeding these things that might be a negative? Or what difficulties are presented to you as someone who, if let's say you're your average keeper and they want to pull in this new feeding regimen, what kind of challenges, if any, might they encounter?
Yeah, good question. So, let's say you wanted to raise or breed grasshoppers. You won't be able to grow them in the densities that you can with DB roaches and crickets, mealworms, whatever. You just don't get to cram them into cardboard,
right?
Because they need to be out. They are diurnal. They need to bask, and they're not going to crowd in the darkness, right? They're not going to go hide in cracks and stuff. They're all going to come out to the top. So you just, you only get to use this sort of like canopy area, which means you're just going to have a lot less insects per volume of space or surface area or whatever. So that's one hurdle. The other hurdle is you can't just feed them anything. So I know, people, if you're feeding roaches and crickets and mealworms, like you're getting away feeding them whatever. Yeah. So, whether those gut loads are good for your animal or not, at least your bugs are able to, eat them and not die. Whereas with grasshoppers, it's much more specific. You really only want to be feeding them leafy greens. And while you can feed them leafy greens from the grocery store, many of them are not necessarily good for them. And we just talked about this. It seems to be the case, and I know Philip just alluded to this with the watery poops and stuff. But it seems to be the case that sort of these grocery vegetables for human consumptions appear to be skewed towards vitamins and water, and just in comparison to the wild stuff, which are just much more fibrous. I think that's the big difference here. So what ends up happening is if you're going to the grocery store, really the best one you can give them is dandelion, like across species. So if I'm feeding them, if I'm feeding them here, I can grow all their various host plants in my backyard and feed it to them. But if obviously if you don't have that, really the best you can do is the dandelions. And I'm not sure why exactly the dandelions from the grocery store are so much better than the other ones they have, because these aren't wild dandelions, and they're actually not even dandelion at all. Because dandelion is Taraxacum officinale. The ones at the grocery store is Chicoria mintipus, which is chicory. It's a completely different plant.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
And yeah, and also, right? Also, escarole. Escarole is also chicory. And
oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was just gonna say.
yeah, and you know the little red one, radicchio, right?
Yes.
Also
Also,
chicory.
Yeah.
yes.
So,
It's
but
also
the
called
thing is,
Belgian endive.
yes, endive too. But the thing is, when I feed escarole, endive to my grasshoppers, it has the same effect that the lettuce has, right? As in, it's just like watery crap. So, so despite being the same species, I guess, you know, I don't really know enough about grocery store vegetables to say, but I just assume that the ones that are called dandelion greens are, I guess, closer to the wild form. They're less altered, manipulated, whatever. They're more fibrous, less watery, and that's, I guess, that's why it's produced the best results for me. But yeah, I've tested every single grocery store vegetable, and no matter what the species of grasshopper I'm feeding it to, dandelion is king every single time. Produces the best results.
Interesting. What about if someone wanted to, like, do you envision being able to get this to a point of scalability where someone could conceivably just buy what they need and not have to worry about breeding, right? In order, like, because this is something I've considered. I've like, you know, I could get some of this stuff. I could set up probably a couple of screen pens with couple of basking lights and UV lights over the top, and really just let something crank. But it would be difficult for me to get that food source for them because it's not available here all the time. And so if it's something I wanted to do where I just wanted to buy grasshoppers as feeders, have them for maybe a week at a time, and then buy more, is that something that you think can be possible?
Yeah, it's certainly possible in the future. I don't know if I would do it personally, just because my interest is just in like the research and development side. Although
Right.
I would make a lot more money doing it that way.
Yeah,
But no, it's just you know, it's a matter. I guess it's a matter for me what I'm interested in. But yeah, that's a good point, and the demand is definitely much more than I can meet right now.
Sure.
Sure. So, you know, I guess we'll see in the future, but you know, hypothetically, it's doable.
So, okay.
Cool.
So now let's get into a little bit about, I guess there's be a couple of things here. So like legality, right? I know we wanted to talk about legality, so I definitely want to talk about that. But before we get to that, or maybe in conjunction with that, possibly, you mentioned that you're kind of just more interested in the R&D side of this, but what are some of the goals that you have with this as a business? And what are some of the challenges that are presented with trying to grow this in a way that that would satisfy you as a person, and just generally, what are some of the, maybe are there hurdles that might prevent someone from taking this, say, to scaling it up to something? I mean, because obviously, like in the, you know, you made the comparison between this and sort of like the big agricultural system that we have here in the United States, which is, you know, kind of toxic and weird, right? So in the same way that something like, you know, regenerative farming or people being able to have access to wild game is not necessarily something that's easily scalable. It's hard to scale those things up to where everyone has that available to them. Is this something like that? Is it something where you imagine being able to access grasshoppers, katydids, beetles, and all these other things as feeders is something that is going to kind of remain a bit more of like a you know, like a Whole Foods for your reptiles kind of thing? You know what I'm saying? Where you, like, if you can afford it, you can go get it for your bearded dragon. But if you can't, you have these backup cricket farms. Is that kind of what you envision? I mean, that's a lot in one question, but
Yeah, I understand. So yeah, definitely, they're not going to come down to cricket prices just
Sure.
because the diurnal nature, the need to come out and bask, not being able to pack them in as tightly, and also the food requirements, right? Crickets at crickets farms, they feed them, I don't want to say garbage, but whatever, they're fed very cheaply, let's just say that. So yeah, it's definitely will not reach, cricket mealworm, those kind of proportions. But certainly they can, be bred in higher quantities than they are now. I think that'll just be a matter of time. But yeah, that's a good comparison. And I guess, give me a second.
Sure.
Okay. So I guess we should get into legality because, the most, in my opinion, the most pressing issue currently regarding grasshoppers is legality and permitting. Just because of how the whole Department of Agriculture system works. But so bottom line, if you're selling grasshoppers, first of all, they must be native to your state,
right?
And must get permits with the state's Department of Agriculture. So in California here, we have California's Department of, I think it's called Farm and Agriculture, CDFA. I have permits with them. And if they aren't native, you aren't going to get a permit. Some people, I guess I'll get into this. Unless you lie, which brings me to a really cringy story. So, so there's a gentleman on the East Coast who got his hands on some graybird grasshoppers, Cichus circonitans. Now this is a southwestern species, so you cannot be selling them over on the East Coast. But on finding out they're illegal, instead of swapping them, for a legal species, which this person's state has about 50 that he could choose from if he wanted. Instead, what he decided to do was go into Wikipedia, edit the species information to say it's native to the East Coast.
Oh, man.
Use this as evidence to apply for a permit.
Perfect.
Wow.
I don't know who out there used to do this, but if you lie to the Department of Agriculture to obtain your permit, it's not legal. It's fraud, right? It's actually worse.
Yeah.
Huge big deal.
You're in big trouble.
Yeah. So, here's the thing. So last year, I was invited to visit our Department of Agriculture to help them with some invasive species and some taxonomy stuff. They have this massive collection of confiscated specimens and stuff. Anyway, it's a really crazy place. But so during our conversations there, I asked, hey, hypothetically, what would happen if I just decided to take the risk upon myself and sell like a non-native species? So if I'm here in California, I sell something that's not native to here, but maybe it's native to another state that I'm sending it or something. And he said, no, you can't do that. And it wouldn't just be you at risk, right? Your customers are also liable as well because they're supposed to know what they're buying.
Right.
So not only, if you're doing this, not only are you putting yourself at risk selling illegal species, but now your customers are at risk of having, their entire collections confiscated or whatever fines are involved. But, God forbid someone ends up in the news for this crap or there's an outbreak on the wrong side of the country, right? So the entire reptile community is at risk. And the Department of Agriculture, they could send the feeders we have access to, back to the Stone Age if they wanted. Right? For whatever you think of fish and wildlife, at least USARC is doing a pretty good job of keeping their overreaches at bay. So the Department of Agriculture is a whole nother beast, right? So they have us on a whitelist already. So like fish and wildlife, they can only dream of having this kind of power, right? So you guys actually had on your podcast with Jay Summers, he made a very prescient comment, which is that we have a problem with calling out bad behavior in this community.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Except time.
Yeah. In this case, it's not just unethical, right? It's straight up illegal.
Right.
And I got to say, it's a big culture shock coming from my field of speech language pathology, where we have an entire board of ethics, and you will lose everything if you don't practice up to these ethical standards, right?
Sure.
And then, here we have herpetoculture, where like some of these donks don't even follow the basic written laws on the books. I mean, running completely illegal businesses when there's no need. Because in this case, right, there are dozens of legal grasshopper species in any given state. And here in California, we have upwards of 200. And I don't just need to pick on the East Coasters, because we actually have a prominent species here that's illegal to work with in California as well, called the American bird grasshopper, Schistoscerca americana, which is this red and black grasshopper. And it's very easy to identify because it has this bright red face and black dorsal stripe. And I asked CDFA if they would issue permits for them, but they said never, so too bad. But this is one of the species I originally had. So upon learning this information, I ended at that colony, and I told Kai to get rid of his too. Although now that I think about it, I haven't checked in with him in a while because he's been graduated from my grasshopper mentorship. But this was last year, so I would hope he's edited them by now. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with making mistakes, because this is new ground in herpetoculture, and it's not going to be easy,
right?
But there's a big difference between that reaction and the other reaction, which is apparently falsifying information on community resources and applying for fraudulent permits.
Sure.
And by the way, if you're just someone who has like a little colony of grasshoppers for yourself, your pets are loving them, and you're like, oh no, are my bugs illegal? Probably don't worry about it. This isn't about you. And I'm talking about people who are trying to, breed them and sell them en masse for profit.
Sure.
Right.
But anyway, I feel like if we don't hold the bad actors accountable, we will lose our privileges, right? So this is just a call out to if you're friends with any of these people, I don't mean that you need to like excommunicate them from your life or something. Although if you feel betrayed or something, I totally understand, because in many cases they're lying at you and they're putting you at risk. And but it's probably time for some preventative measures, right? Because I don't really believe in retribution, and I don't think it's very effective. I prefer like prevention, reform, that type of thing. But I like some of these people are really in need of reformation. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, So if you're a customer of any of these people and you realize that you've been receiving illegal species, in my opinion, you got to stop buying from them and tell everyone to stop buying from them, because as long as they can continue to find unsuspecting customers, they will continue, right?
Yes.
Because the only reason that they're breaking the law and putting our community at risk is because it's just financial gain, right? Because there are a ton of legal species for them to choose from.
Right.
So, I mean, once the financial incentives have shifted, they'll have no choice to switch to legal species, or at least that's how I feel.
I mean, you're really speaking to something that's very much near and dear to my heart. Now, maybe on a different level, because I also think that bad behavior should be called out when it's not just the illegal stuff. It's also just shit business practice, right? Like the number of people I know who have received an animal from another person selling that was not what they expected, that had an injury or an illness or something that they weren't informed about intentionally. So, I mean, even that stuff, you have to be able to stand up to that kind of thing, and the fact that people can continue. I mean, you're absolutely right. That it allows the worst and least qualified people to represent what we do. In this, it's bad marketing, really, at the end of the day. Like, it's bad marketing for herpetoculture, right? It sets a horrible precedent and turns people off to what you're doing in general. It makes it harder for you to do your business in an ethical way, because people are going to lump you in with those assholes. I mean, there's just so many there are so many ways that it's just like a legitimate massive problem, and it really drives me insane. So I appreciate you also kind of doubling down on that, and it makes me really happy. I'm gonna let my dog out of the room. She wants to go out and see my wife. So I'm just so.
Yeah. Sure. Man, I think you had just following up with that. I think you guys had who was it? It might have been the Stephen Kush episode, where he said, as far as like some of this legislation that comes down to smack us, a lot of times it could just be a couple of bad actors. They ruin it for the rest of us, and we have to suffer the consequences. And sometimes these people end up even being revered or whatever. So
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally.
It's definitely an issue. Yeah.
Some names definitely jump to mind when you say that.
Yeah, for sure. And so is that legality, actually, just to get back to a question I had about legality again, that's to sell them, or is that just to have them and feed them? Do you need permitting to actually just to have them?
It's to sell them mainly. The thing is, if you just go outside and catch some species near you, and you breed them and just feed them to your reptiles, and you don't do anything else, as far as I know, you don't need permits for that.
Okay.
It's really just if you're selling them. Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's
yeah.
good.
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah.
I don't know, because this is something that I've toyed with this before. Like I got some grasshoppers, didn't do it right, didn't work, and just ended up feeding what I had left off, and then just being like, okay. And I was like, but I've wanted to try it again. I've wanted to give it another shot and see how I could do this, because just my animals, everything. I mean, even whether it's the way the Pilbara rock monitors run after those crickets, because they're actually those grasshoppers, because they're actually like they just love them, right? Whether it's my desire to also offer some of those grasshoppers to the Uromastyx, because I'm sure they would love them as well. I mean, you name it. So this would make me super happy to be able to provide. And so I want to give it another try, but I guess I'll have to get this permit, which is fine.
Yeah, if you're selling them,
Yeah. Well, but I'd end up, if I'm gonna breed them at all, I'd probably end up selling them a little bit.
Oh yeah. Right. I mean, might as well. Yeah. No, it would definitely help some people out, because there's sort of an availability issue right now. So yeah, for sure.
And there's also they're more costly to raise than a lot of other things, so it can help offset that.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah, both true.
That's one of the kind of main reasons why I haven't dived in more fully with grasshoppers and such, is just like the energy cost, of having more heat on everything and all of that. It's hard for me to justify when I'm already paying so much in electricity.
Every
month. But yeah.
I mean, I feel like in some ways I could just take like a small screen reptarium and put it right in with underneath one of the basking lights.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There you go.
Because I have so many,
that's the permaculture solution for it, right there.
Yeah. I would
stacking functions.
It probably would be good for the animals too, to like try to get in on the cage and not be able to do it. Just like have them explore over the whole thing to try to see if they can find a way in to eat all the grasshoppers. Probably be some form of torturous enrichment,
they would figure it out pretty quick that they could get in there.
Or they'd figure out a way to get in. Yeah, that would be a real problem. But okay, so another thing about this, are you aware of like a number of other people trying to propagate these things and make them more available for folks? Or is this the kind of thing where you would press other people, where you'd say like, hey, we need more people doing this, you should do it too? How do you think about that?
Sure. Not a lot of people doing it right now, because it's just I guess it's so different. People aren't used to it. Most people I know have failed at it. So there definitely needs to be a lot more education into it, and I should probably create some resources for that.
Mm.
But yeah, of course, I always encourage people to join. It's just going to take some time and some education. I haven't put that much effort into teaching in the past, since I graduated, basically, because I spent all my graduate years teaching Kai. So I just I've taken a break for that too, to focus on my own family and my business and stuff like that.
Sure.
But yeah, definitely I got to create some resources on how to breed them yourself and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just a lot different. The diurnal aspect, the arboreal aspect, the need for ventilation, and
Right.
yeah, all of that, and the fact that give me a second, I need to get hydrated again.
Sure.
And the fact that the sort of finickiness, and a lot of people, the first trouble they ran into was they fed them something that had pesticides on it.
Oh, sure.
And here's the thing:
Yeah.
grasshoppers are super susceptible to pesticides. If you
Right.
feed them something with even a whiff of pesticide on it, they'll start dying immediately.
Jeez.
And on one hand, there's a silver lining in the sense that your animals are not going to ingest the pesticides, because the grasshoppers are just dropping dead. Obviously you're not going to feed them off. Whereas if you had a roach colony, they could eat that pesticide for a long time and have it accumulate in them, and you feed that to your reptile, never knowing.
Right.
So there's that silver lining. However, obviously the problem is you lose your entire colony, and you gotta completely restart. So so something I've noticed that even if a few grasshoppers survive, there's still some sort of neurological damage, and they appear to lose their sense of taste and smell, because they just walk around chewing on everything. The time where I got afflicted by pesticides, the ones that lived, they're just walking around chewing on the aluminum screen. They didn't know what to eat. So yeah, they end up, even if the pesticides have left their system, they end up being damaged, and you can't really use them to breed anymore. So yeah, there's a lot of hurdles in getting them started.
Oh man, that's interesting. Well, so okay, I want to give some space.
Go for it.
No, please, you. And now my brain's kind of turning and trying to figure out a way I can do this more myself. But yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. Naturally, me too. But well, one thing I'm curious about, Dean, is just, this is kind of going back in some ways in the conversation, but you spoke about the nutritional differences, of course. And I'm curious, first of all, are you keeping reptiles right now at all? And if so, have you noticed any differences in like the in the health of your animals since transitioning them to a primarily grasshopper based diet?
Yeah, sure. So I got a chameleon. I have the reptiles are all kind of shared between me and my wife.
Yeah,
but I got a chameleon, 2 bearded dragons, 2 blue tongue skinks, and a couple of leopard geckos.
Nice.
Which might seem weird, because aren't these like really like normie reptiles? You think I'd be into arboreals, which I am, but these reptiles I had from a long time ago. The grasshoppers came later. Yeah. So
yeah, makes sense.
So anyway, in terms of health, I think I touched on this earlier, but it's always difficult to pinpoint with animals where exactly their health or lack thereof comes from, because there are so many factors to control for. And not only that, they're long-lived enough that you just don't end up seeing issues right away. But I've never had to take any of any of these pets, they're all long term, and I've never had to take a single one of them to the vet. Never had a health issue with any one of them. So that's good. But at the same time, I couldn't guarantee you that that's, because of the diet or anything like that. And, with, less than 10 animals, it's also small enough sample size that, it could be anything. It's hard to pinpoint anything out. And now that we're in San Diego, they get the natural sunlight and stuff like that. I can keep them outdoors and they can sort of be in the best health that they can.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That makes
Jealous
a
of
big
that.
difference.
Yeah.
Extremely jealous, in fact.
Yeah. Middle of the winter, 70-degree day. Beautiful.
Damn it, dude. God damn it.
Another thing I'm curious about, and maybe this connects a little bit to San Diego in some ways, is if you've experimented at all with phasmids. I know that they are subject to a lot of the same regulations, from Department of Agriculture. But I noticed also that I think that there's actually a species of phasmid, I think Indian stick insects, which have created an invasive population, I think in San Diego, if I remember correctly.
Oh, good.
So anyway, I'm curious. Yeah.
Yeah, not just San Diego, but the entire West Coast. I believe, from Washington all the way to San Diego. The entire West Coast. The Indian stick insects. It's a parthenogenic species. Just drops eggs one at a time.
Oh yeah. Here's
the thing with stick insects. Yes, there are the legality issues. First of all, I don't know if I would be able to sell an invasive species, even if it's established. I'd have to take that up with the Department of Agriculture. I'm actually working on them with an invasive grasshopper right now. We'll see how that turns out. But anyway, yeah, there's that issue. And then even after I got California Department of Agriculture cleared, I don't know if I would be able to send them into Oregon and Washington, and almost certainly not the rest of the U.S. I know some people do just ship them anywhere, but technically that's illegal. So I'm not going to be doing that. And the issue with phasmids just in general is the same sort of thing with most grasshoppers, which they are sort of partitioned off into different, the little sections within the country, which means you can't really ship coast to coast. And in the case with grasshoppers, there are actually there are 6 species that I know of total that are native to the entire U.S. And it's very abnormal, but they have very special adaptations. And I don't know I don't know a lot about phasmids. It's not my thing. But I don't know of any phasmids like that. And all the phasmids you see in the hobby and stuff, they're all like foreign, either invasive or not. But also another thing with phasmids is they are not part of natural, diurnal reptile diets because they're nocturnal. So if you look at, I don't know where it got started, because I saw people saying on the forums that phasmids are a natural food for chameleons, but they're not. You can go go Google Scholar and look at any chameleon diets. Phasmids are not a significant part of any chameleon diet.
Yeah, I think the highest small percentage.
Yeah, the highest you might find is 1%, and that's those are kind of negligible, right? That's not a staple part of the diet. The staples, you're looking at 20+% for grasshoppers or flies or bees or whatever, something or caterpillars. But and I believe it's because they're nocturnal,
right?
And they're also kind of slow to reproduce. There are a lot of reasons why I never really got into phasmids, but those are some of them. And as far as I guess since I was talking about, they're spread across the US and only, being in little pockets here and there because of, the different humidities and temperatures and stuff like that. The grasshoppers that have been able to spread across the entire US. So I guess I'll list them off. There's differential grasshopper, two-striped grasshopper, red-legged grasshopper, and migratory grasshopper. So these 4 grasshoppers are all in the genus Melanopus, which is spur-throated grasshoppers. And one more that I should probably put in that sort of lump in with them is the Carolina grasshopper, Dysostera carolina. It's not a spur-throated grasshopper, but it's a band-winged grasshopper. When you walk into a field and you see grasshoppers jump all over the place, these are the 2 main types of grasshoppers you're going to see. You're going to see spur-throated grasshoppers and band-winged grasshoppers. But anyway, the species here that I listed, so their adaptation is that in the eastern U.S., where it's much more humid, they're able to basically live anywhere in the grasslands or something like that, right? Basically, in I don't know. I guess I should give the comparison first. In the western half of the U.S., they have adapted to riparian habitats only. So that's how they manage the humidity. So they always require a decent amount of humidity, but by sticking to only riparian habitats in the western U.S. and then just being out in the grasslands in the eastern U.S., it's allowed them to colonize from coast to coast. And then basically, all of these species also have an obligatory diapause. So that means in the south, the summer is going to come earlier, and in the north, it's going to come much later. But because the diapause times are different for each region, they're basically able to overwinter as eggs, even though all the adults die off in the winter, and then pop up whenever the summer is for that given area. So those 5 species have that adaptation. And there's one species that has a different strategy. It also has diapause, but instead of, so this is one we were talking about earlier, the spotted bird grasshopper, right? It's just a circle lineata. So instead of just being kind of generalist and being like, okay, in the east, I'll be grassy, and in the west, it'll be a riparian species, it's actually divided into 5 or more different ecotypes. And each region of the United States has its own ecotype of spotted bird grasshopper that looks different, and it eats different foods. It has a different environment, and it's just sort of like through adaptive radiation, they've been able to establish a bunch of these completely different populations that are all unique to each other, but yet it's one species that has managed to spread across the entire U.S.
So interesting.
Wild. Man, I never considered any of this stuff. This is great.
So, yeah, and I sort of went off topic from the stick insect thing, but with stick insects, as far as I know, you just don't have anything like that. So that's I guess that's the reason why
the biggest limitation there.
Yeah, and I assume the Department of Agriculture will not be okay with shipping these coast to coast, and if anyone does do it, they do it kind of discreetly, right? So that's just not how I want to be running my business.
Yeah, sure.
Of course. Yeah, of course not. Makes sense.
Man, wild. Okay, well, so we're getting just over that 90-minute mark. And so I figure it might be a good time, number one, to say that we definitely have to have you on again.
Sure. Yeah. I got plenty more to talk about. I got a lot of topics that, interesting topics that I could cover, but we were just not going to have time for.
Yeah, sure. And by no means am I trying to shut the conversation down. So what I think maybe the thing might be is I'd love if out of what you have, some of the other stuff you'd like to talk about, if you might pick one thing you'd like to get kind of out before we'll treat that as sort of like a final topic, and then we'll ask you our closer, and then we'll call it for the day. Does that sound fair to both of you?
Yeah. Can I use the restroom real quick?
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, go for it.
Dude, I hydrated too much, man. Oh.
Yeah, no.
We've all been there. Man, this is amazing.
Yeah, this is a super cool episode. This one, I'm excited about it.
Me too. Makes me want to get grasshoppers.
I know. I really want to get some. Dude, the site's really great.
It is. It's really well put together.
Yeah, it is.
We will link it for everybody listening. It will be in the show notes, of course.
And I really want to try this again and get some more.
Yeah, dude, for sure.
I tried it once before and it didn't work well for me. So I got to figure it out. And I kind of just want to get some of this diet anyway. And I want to get, I really want to try, I want to get those stupid praying mantises that he's got and just breed those just for fun.
Yes.
They're so cool. They're so cool. All this stuff. It's just I really hope we can do more with this, because this is super cool.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Agreed. It'd be cool to see it get scaled.
Mm-hmm.
He's back.
Yes. Give me a second.
Well,
sure, yeah.
Back. Take your time.
And it's also just extra cool because I think this is a great example of you being pretty industrious and creative with this, because I think sometimes, like, it's, again, the feeders are something where it would seem like a blind spot for some folks, because I feel like so many keepers kind of, and I would count myself among them as someone who sort of just thought that was sort of solved. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, we have crickets, mealworms, waxworms, and dubia. Like, what's the big deal? And it's like done, like problem solved, but it's not really the case at all.
Yep.
True. Yep.
And I actually want to go back to something that I was talking about earlier about how when you look at the chameleon diet studies, you get 90 to 99% within these 6 orders of insects. And everything else combined, including lizards, frogs, centipedes, phasmids, praying mantises, crickets, blah 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 blah. All this is within, like, all this combined is within like a single digit in terms of percentage. So it's really just it's negligible. But I forgot to mention this is actually only the case where you're seeing them in their native habitat that's relatively undisturbed. So what I mean by that is when you look at invasive populations, it's not the same. So so you have to be careful when you're looking at diet studies, because if you look at an invasive population study, it's not going to be actually representative of what they eat. And a good example of that is what was it? There's a couple of good examples actually. So on Hawaii, there's a Hawaii diet study of Jackson's chameleons, and I was looking and I saw that they eat 0% grasshoppers, and I was like, "What the hell is going on here? That doesn't make any sense. How can I eat grasshoppers?" Well, Hawaii is a volcanic island in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah,
they don't have a single native grasshopper species.
Yeah,
not one, right? So, however, this is something I knew. The graybird grasshopper that we were talking about earlier, Schistosuchus nitens, became invasive in Hawaii around the same time as the Jackson's chameleon, which is in the 60s. And this study was done either in 1999 or 2000. I don't remember the exact year. So by then, the graybird grasshopper, it had taken over all of the Hawaiian islands. And you can actually find news articles about how the grasshopper destroyed a ton of the flora all over the islands because it had no
Wow.
natural predators. And
Right.
so I was like, okay, wait a minute. So they should, like, how are they not eating these things that are all over the islands? And what happens here is this led to a bunch of other stuff that I realized. But anyway, so the graybird grasshopper, or bird grasshoppers in general, require really high temperatures to reproduce.
Hmm.
And the Jackson's chameleon notoriously need really cool temperature, right? If you don't give them
Right.
that nighttime temperature drop to like 50 degrees or whatever, they'll get that temporal gland infection. So basically what's going on here is that, first of all, Hawaii only has one species of grasshopper that's invasive, and it lives on a completely different part of the island from the Jackson's chameleon, right? So the grasshopper inhabits all of the hot lowland area, and the Jacksons are in the cooler montane areas.
Right.
So
of course.
So even though they're all on the same island, that I guess they just never cross paths. So that was a super interesting
Amazing.
find.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it led to a bunch of other revelations, which one of which was that the bird grasshoppers that I sort of started all my breeding projects with are not really consumed much by chameleons at all. And not all diet studies will show the species of insects that are eaten, but there was one that showed like 5 grasshopper species that were eaten by a certain type of chameleon. And there were no bird grasshoppers. And when I first saw that, it kind of shocked me because, well, these are the most arboreal grasshoppers. If a chameleon is going to eat any grasshopper, why not these?
That one.
And it had to do with going back to that Jackson's chameleon study. Basically, bird grasshoppers, because of their high heat requirements, they're not necessarily going to be in chameleon habitats, because chameleons often require cooler temperatures. So that also led me to thinking, okay, I got to add some different species. Going through the, not just the scientific evidence, but using documentaries and other people's anecdotal experiences, and going to Madagascar to corroborate. It seems to be the case that chameleons mostly eat band-winged and spur-throated grasshoppers for the most part. So, so that actually led me to focus a little more on these other types of grasshoppers. Whereas initially, I thought I would just go with bird grasshoppers because they're arboreal. I mean, they're all arboreal to a degree, but they grow really fast, and they were sort of my first choice. But that I had to rethink that. And then
Amazing.
A contrast to that is a contrast to Hawaii is, of course, Madagascar, because instead of being a volcanic island that popped up in the middle of the ocean, you've got an island that split off. Right, we're talking about a continental island that split off the African landmass. So it came with all the flora and fauna. So there's already grasshoppers and this and that. So if you look at Madagascar, you get basically like a normal chameleon diet that you would expect to see anywhere else.
Right.
However, there is actually another thing that's really interesting about Madagascar, which is that spiders are randomly a big part of their diets. And this is something I think the MadCam guys, I don't know if they're based in Germany or whatever, basically those European chameleon guys did their own diet studies. And as I was looking at them, I was a little confused, because I'm like, why are they eating so many spiders, right? Everywhere else you're looking at within 6 orders of insects, as long as you're looking at them in their native habitat. And Madagascar should be their native habitat, right? But so what I suspect happened here is, well, first of all, for anyone who knows what's going on in Madagascar right now, is the forests are being clear cut. So it's, can you really describe this as native habitat, right? It's being heavily disturbed. And I'll get to in a second how that relates to the spiders. So you guys know about the brown tree snake, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, of course, on Guam.
Yeah. So if you look at the initial excerpts for the scientists who were visiting Guam, and this was before they knew that the brown tree snake was doing its thing. One of the first things they noticed when they're trying to investigate the disappearance of the birds and stuff was that there was just this insane amount of spiders, right? They're like, oh, this is disgusting. Why there's so many spiders here?
Right.
Right. And it turns out that, when the habitat is heavily disturbed and you don't, the birds and lizards and stuff aren't thriving, it results in a balloon in spider populations. Right. So it's basically like a trophic cascade, right? The spiders, the things that normally would eat spiders are not there. And not only that, you get this bloom in pest type insects like roaches and flies and stuff. And then the spiders get all the food in the world. So when I'm talking about, circling back to when I'm talking about chameleon diet studies and what they show, that's why I'm saying we can only really look at, their native habitats and maybe even undisturbed habitats, because when you're looking at chameleons in Madagascar at this point, they may, be in their, natural place of origin, but I don't know if we can continue to call it, their historic native habitat anymore, right? It's almost like they're in a foreign habitat in their native land, if that makes any sense.
It does. Oh yeah. No, it's totally. This is it's myopia, right? It's like this. It's a. Generally, like what the first time I think I ever heard this term was like in generational myopia. The idea that we have this tendency to bias the world that we were born into as the way it's always been before us, right? And so we have a tendency to look at the way things change during our lifetime and look back at our own early experience and say, oh, this wasn't like this when I was 5. Right. So therefore something must be weird and different, but it's the same myopic restriction and perspective can come from any, as you mentioned, when people, going to Guam first start, you think, oh, there's a lot of spiders here. And they didn't know that the brown tree snake was jacking stuff up. They didn't know, but they made the assumption that, oh, this was the way it was. This must be the way it has always been. And that's not really accurate. Right. So it's a pretty intriguing idea. And it's something that I think a lot of folks will kind of, this is probably happening everywhere to a certain extent or another, to like one extent or another, right? The idea that, but it also happens with other topics, right? Even people, like I have kind of talked in more than one place and at more than one time about the way people kind of misunderstand or can misuse like wild photography, like wild evidence of like what's going on in a habitat. And this is why I always try to say, like, you can't, just because you take, there's a famous pic, it's not even famous, but there's some photo of like a Sara loricata in a river. And it's like, that animal didn't go there. Like I'd be willing to bet that it didn't just go there on its own, or it got scared in, or it got thrown in by the photographer, or the more prevalent example or more common example is you'll see people post a photo of more than one Uromastyx in the wild, like a male and a female, or maybe a female with a whole mess of babies. And they'll say, see, they live together just fine in the wild. I'm like, this is a tiny.
So much context.
So much. Yeah. Yes. So much context is happening there. There's so many moving parts. But there's this desire, there's a real desire for people to simplify. There's a real, we want that elevator pitch, right? We want that real fast. Give me the gist. And it's like that. I can't give you. There's no gist to give. It's like it's much more complicated and subtle. Actually, I thought of something I'd like to ask you before we go to the final closer question too. Yeah. And I give you, unless there's anything else you'd like to cover before we wind down, but there is something I'd like to ask about, which is you mentioned the bug culture in Japan, right? Like this sort of
Yes.
Yeah.
well developed. This is something that I think we'd love to. If you have any recommendations for someone for us to speak to, please, like, we'd love to talk to more people thinking about this, like you are, and other people thinking sort of differently in this sort of adjacent industry to herpetoculture. But given you clearly have some other level of experience in bug culture, I don't know what you would call it, but is there anything that stands out that it seems present in bug keeping that could be something that herpetoculture could learn from?
Wow. Okay. Never thought of that. But yeah, I suppose there are differences between the communities. It's hard to come up with anything specific off the top of my head.
Yeah, sorry, there's a lot kind of.
Yeah, and especially since I'm not super immersed in the entomology community these days, because what I'm doing involves feeder insects for reptiles, but
Sure.
It's a little different because the bug world, there's a lot more like collecting and stuff going on that you can't really do in the reptile world. But certainly there are a lot of I guess there are a lot of like kind of like collection trips. I really like that. I really like going out, and the idea of going out with your friends to a native habitat, and checking out how everything lives there. And I guess the big difference is with insects, you can kind of just collect them, and you can't do this with reptiles. But with insects, there is a lot of that, just kind of collecting something and then rearing it and see if you can learn something about them that way and stuff like that. So that's definitely a big difference.
Okay.
I feel like it's not really the answer you're looking for. I feel like you're thinking you're thinking of maybe, hey, what's something they're doing that we could do better or something like that. But
very open.
But yeah, that's a big difference. As far as Japanese bug culture goes, that's something I dealt with as a child, right?
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've been involved in that there, and also I feel like I think that resort that I went to as a kid probably no longer exists, at least not in the form that it used to. I tried looking it up, and I found something with the same name, but it looked like a completely different experience. So
okay.
It's I do wish to some degree that we had that sort of enthusiasm with insects here in the States, because I've done a lot of educational shows with my reptiles and my bugs and stuff. I've done them at schools, I've done them at birthday parties, and the thing that I've noticed in the US is up to about early to mid elementary school, all kids are kind of naturally into these bugs and reptiles and stuff. They love it. It's around later, sort of toward the end of elementary school to middle school, I guess, kind of around when puberty hits, when it just becomes kind of not cool and gross. And yeah, I sort of wish we could change that. But yeah, I still, to this day, if I have an opportunity to go do a show like that, I always love doing that, because the educational aspect is really big for me.
Yeah, I think it changes a little bit. Like I was really psyched when I was a little younger here, in the Butterfly Pavilion here in Colorado opened up. There's one. It's actually 5 minutes from here, where I live, and it's kind of like, it's okay. Like, no offense to the institution. It is just sort of like, all right, it's just like this giant greenhouse, and they put a bunch of butterflies in it, and there's fruit and there's flowers, and it's cool. Don't get me wrong. And then they've kind of like changed and evolved a little bit. They have like a sort of a cross section of a beehive, and they have some saltwater aquariums there, and they have some stuff. But recently I learned that they're getting a huge upgrade, probably a multi-million-dollar upgrade, like a massive upgrade to the facility. And they're turning it into like a big proper biodome type, like something that, at least from what I've seen, looks a little bit more akin to something like the California Academy of Sciences, but without the fish, right? Which is sick. Like, I'm so into that. And I feel like everybody goes there. Like, people go there. Like, every time I've gone, past, present, whatever, there's always a lot of different people there. And I think it's just, the fact that that's getting remodeled and built out and upgraded just speaks to sort of like the growing, it's just, all this stuff, the interest in this stuff is growing, and the stigma, I think, is kind of tapering down a little bit. Like,
yeah, I actually think you're totally right. I don't know if it's because of TikTok or what, but it does seem like there's an increase in popularity for these, little bugs and creatures, especially like you saw, I don't know if you guys noticed like the explosion in popularity of like jumping spiders.
Oh yeah.
Totally. Yeah. It's interesting to see that.
Yeah. So that was part of that too. But it does seem that just in general, they're, a little cooler than they were when we were kids.
Yeah. Sure.
But so that's a good trend.
Yeah. Trend for sure. Absolutely. Okay. Well, so Roy, do you want to ask the closure question?
Yeah. I actually have one quick one before the closer.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Closer, if we can. Just because I'm curious, you talked about your time in Japan and herping and going out bugging there, whatever that would be properly called. But I'm curious if there's a specific like herp story from your time there that stands out to you, like a particular memory, anything. If there is one, I'd be curious.
Should I talk about this?
Oh no.
It's just probably fine. Okay, so when I was I don't know how old I was. I was in elementary school. I caught like 20 skinks. There's just the regular, like 5-line type, the one with the blue tail.
Yeah.
They must have just hatched, and they're like a bunch of little babies everywhere. Stuffed them in a water bottle. And also caught a bunch of frogs, caught some giant grasshoppers, stuffed them all in a water bottle. Because we were about to leave, and I wanted to take I wanted to take them home. Shoved them in my backpack.
Mm-hmm.
My mom found out when we were at the airport.
Oh no.
As we were going through security. And she smacked me in the head. And nothing happened.
Oh, wow.
Nothing happened. I still have the carcass of that dead grasshopper.
Wow.
Okay.
From when I was a small child. And this is basically, for those who don't know, this is a testament to how different the world was before 9/11.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Just, I obviously shouldn't have done that, but then again, I was a very small child.
Yeah, dude, you didn't.
It can be forgiven when you're taught.
Yeah. So that's my sort of. I guess that's the experience that stands out the most. But of course, I've had much more. And at the same time, I haven't been to Japan since COVID because the restrictions. And then by the time they had opened up, I was in the middle of grad school and I just didn't have time. So, I've got to get back. I want to go with my wife again. And it's been a long time. And I actually, I feel like, Philip, you've mentioned something about, wanting to travel to Japan. But, I have that same feeling, I got to go back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, man. I've never, my wife and I had a plan to go to Japan and get engaged there. And we bought flights in like January of 2020. So, and so that just never ended up happening. And
I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's okay. It happens. And then I'm Japanese by heritage too. So
Same.
so I want to, there's so many reasons why I'd like to go. I mean, everything from heritage to, we were supposed to go there already, to jujitsu, to, everything. Right. So eventually,
so many good reasons.
Yeah. Some of my favorite artists all come from Japan, whether it's modern ones like Oga Kazuo, does the background paintings for the Miyazaki movies, or whether Kawase, man, I blanking on his name, but I don't know why, but painter from 100 to 200 years ago.
Okay.
Hawase Kasui, I think. Yeah. Just unbelievable. Like just some of the best, incredible paintings anybody's ever made. Right. Came out. And so, I gotta go. I gotta make it happen.
Yeah. I don't know anything about the sort of art side. You could probably teach me something about that.
Well, it's accidental to a certain degree. It's just
okay.
Follow what you're interested in, but I'd love to talk about it. I'll talk about it any day. Whether it's that or the history of sort of jujitsu and its origins in Japan and India, way back. So I don't know. And we talk about it all the time. But now, it'll probably be a little while. She's pregnant, so we have a son coming up in July. So
oh man,
it's just going to be when we want to travel with our kids too. So hopefully maybe that's what we can do. Maybe we'll postpone it, make it a family trip,
Oh man, good luck. I mean, it's doable. The first time I went to Japan, I was 4 months old. So
right.
Yeah, there you go.
Gotta be doable. Can't be that hard.
Look how Dean turned out. He's fine.
Yeah.
He's doing great.
He survived.
He's fine. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Managed not to get arrested as a small child. It all worked out.
Thankfully, yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. Well, with all that said, so our closer question, Dean, is the same for all of our guests, and that is why herpetoculture? So why for you? Why for all of us? Why does it matter? Herpetoculture.
Sure. And I actually have a Philip Leeds style analogy for this one.
Right.
So herpetoculture, much like jujitsu, is a cult. So no one's born thinking like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get into herpetoculture, right? Just kind of, you kind of just get sucked into it. In some way, it feels like there's also levels, right? You went outside. You're just catching lizards, you're still a white belt, right? But maybe, you went into a pet store, you got your first chameleon. Oh, now you're a blue belt, right?
Yeah.
And then, maybe you're getting into breeding and you're in your purples and your browns.
Yeah.
And, at the very top, you've got the grandmaster, the coveted, the black belt.
Yeah.
The reptile show podcaster.
All right. Oh, man.
And I mean, there are a lot of similarities. You got like funny Australian guys making DVDs and all that stuff.
Yeah. Wait, so you train?
What?
You train jujitsu?
I used to in high school.
Okay.
But you got poor hygiene.
Out there. Yeah, that's a problem.
Yesterday? No. I don't know if it was yesterday, but this week I saw posts in the jiu-jitsu subreddit. It was like, hey, there are these black dots on my gi. What is this? And everyone was like, bro, that's mold.
Oh my God. Dude, that is so not okay.
Oh no.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that you're in a cult. We don't have free will anyway. It doesn't matter. But my opinion, we got the best cult in the world. So what are you gonna do?
I certainly can't argue with that. Definitely can't. Definitely can't argue with that one. I'm a member of more than one cult, apparently.
Yeah. It's in the name too.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. It is, in fact, in the name.
Herpetoculture.
Yeah, checkmate.
Yeah, it was right.
Boom! It's over.
Right under our noses the whole time.
That could be our next bumper sticker and T-shirt. Just Herpetoculture.
Exactly.
That's a damn good idea. That's a damn good idea. Hell yeah. That and Phil Tremper's "It's a Disease." We're done. I don't know how thousands and thousands of people haven't gone and bought those. I don't know how that hasn't happened.
Seriously, come on, slackers.
You can't deny it.
Can't deny it. All right. Well, where can folks find you on the socials and all that stuff, Dean, or if they're interested in getting some grasshoppers from you down the road? How do they do that?
My website is feedmychameleon.com. Feed My Chameleon on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, although I haven't posted anything there yet. But if I post some sort of video guide, it'll be there.
Cool.
I don't know what else I have. Those are the main ones. But yeah,
great.
Feed My Chameleon. You can find me there.
Sweet.
All right. It'll be in the show notes. And I'm going to hit the button. Thank you.
Awesome.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.